This is the Death Row and Executions channel. I am Paco Rivera. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more Death Row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also, check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover recent crimes and convictions. There will be a link for that as well. The state of Florida has scheduled its 7th execution for this year. Now, as I record this video, the execution of Anthony Wainwright on June 10th has not happened yet. Should that happen, Thomas Gudinas, who is now 51 years old, is next, 14 days later, on June 24th. This case was a bit more complicated because of the inconsistencies in the reports. Most reports state that the body of the murder victim was found in an alleyway near the parking lot of a bar that she was in earlier. Some reports saying right around the corner from the bar. And those same reports state that the alleyway was near a school called Pace near that bar. But the nearest Pace school that I found is 5 miles away from that bar, unless Pace School was in downtown Orlando in 1994 and later moved. Also, we have the prosecutor who tried this case in Florida, Jeff Ashton. Remember Jeff Ashton from the famous Casey Anthony case? Anyway, we have Jeff Ashton saying that DNA was recovered from the thigh of the murder victim. And yet, the man convicted and sentenced to death, Thomas Gudinas, who pleaded not guilty and continues to claim his innocence to this day, is saying that his DNA was never found on the body and that DNA was never tested to see if it belongs to someone else. But I'm going to break this story down as best I could with what I have. By May of the year 1994, 31 years ago, Thomas Gudinas, who was 20 years old, was living in North Carolina, but he traveled to Orlando, Florida to stay with 2 cousins that were living there, and 2 friends also staying in the apartment. On the evening of May 23rd of that year, a Monday, Gudinas and his cousins and friends all drank and smoked weed in the apartment that night. Now, all these individuals, with Gudinas living in North Carolina, and the others, I think, were now all living in Florida by this time, had all grown up together in Massachusetts. Later that night, at about 8:30 p.m., several of them decided to hit the bars in downtown Orlando and ended up at Barbarella, a nightclub where, even though it was the 90s, the bar was still playing 1980s new wave, which is what that club was known for. That night, the bar had a special of $5 for all the draft beer that you can drink. Because Gudinas was only 20 years old, he used a cousin's ID to get in. Those roommates of Gudinas, when they were interviewed by police several weeks later, would say that Thomas Gudinas was with them until about 1:30 in the morning, and then he just disappeared. They did say, however, that that was not uncommon because they would sometimes split up and all do their own thing around the bar. Because the group had left the bar several times during the night to smoke weed where they had their car parked, they figured Gudinas went out there to do the same thing. But he never returned to the bar. Also at the bar that night was a woman named Rachel Smith, who was with her fiancé. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, about a half hour after Gudinas was last seen by his friends, Rachel and her fiancé decided to leave Barbarella. But Rachel went to the parking lot first as the fiancé remained in the bar a few minutes longer saying goodbye to his friends. Rachel then realized that she was in the wrong parking lot, and she noticed a man crouched between some cars looking at her. She became spooked and quickly made her way to the other parking lot where her car was parked. She also realized that the man had now followed her into that parking lot. So she quickly got in her car and locked the doors just in the nick of time as the man arrived at her car. That man, who she would later positively identify as Thomas Gudinas, tried to open her car doors and was banging on the windows, yelling, "I want to F you." Then, as Gudinas was trying to break the window with his fist, Rachel pressed down on the horn and honked it in desperation. Gudinas then ran off. Rachel would later meet up with her fiancé and they went home. She did not notify police about what had happened. Not that night, anyway. Also in the bar that night was a 27-year-old woman named Michelle McGrath. She was gathered with some friends. According to Michelle's family, Michelle loved music and the downtown Orlando nightlife and the nightclubs where she could listen to music all night. About a half hour after the incident in the parking lot with Rachel, now about 3 o'clock in the morning, about closing time for Barbarella, Rachel said bye to her friends. Michelle, who was wearing black shorts and boots, was walking to her car when she was suddenly and viciously attacked by Thomas Gudinas. Gudinas then dragged Rachel into this very narrow alleyway or pathway between two buildings, and he shut the metal door that encloses that area. Gudinas continued to beat Rachel until she was bloody and unconscious, and he ended up getting blood on his jeans and clothing and on his hands. And we know this because there were bloody palm prints on the walls in that alleyway. As one of the investigators had described the brutal attack to a reporter years later, Gudinas placed the palms of his hands on the walls to sustain himself, and he proceeded to use the boot on his foot to stomp Rachel's head over and over until she was dead. Now, the next things that Gudinas did is pretty disgusting. Gudinas removed Rachel's boots and black shorts and much of her clothing. He pushed her top and bra up over her breasts, and at some point, he also removed his own jeans. We know this because those were found hanging near the alleyway by police early the following morning. Gudinas proceeded to indecently assault the now dead body for the next few hours, also positioning the body in ways that would cause shock to whoever finds her. Meanwhile, Thomas Gudinas' roommates left the bar after closing. They looked around for Gudinas, but couldn't find him. So after a while, they said, the heck with it, let him find his own way home. And they got into their car and went home. The investigation concluded that Gudinas had spent hours right there with the dead body until the early morning daylight hours. And we know this because of the time that Rachel was last seen at the bar and because of a woman named Jane Brand who works at a school called Pace on the other side of one of those walls for the alleyway, who had seen Thomas Gudinas on the school's property when she arrived at work at about 7 o'clock in the morning. This was now Tuesday, May 24th, 1994. According to Jane Brand, she saw a man wearing black shorts. He's now wearing black shorts. He was on the steps of the school, and Jane informed him that he can't be there. She offered to open the gate and let him out, but he went to the wall of the alleyway, jumped over it, landing somewhere in the alley on the other side, and he left. What we know from the investigation, Gudinas pushed the push bar on the metal door for the alleyway to get out, leaving his handprints on that push bar. And Gudinas saw a homeless man holding car keys that the homeless man found on the ground of the parking lot. That homeless man's name was Culbert Presley. Culbert found the keys next to some ripped up clothing. Culbert had been going around the area trying to find who the keys belonged to. That's when Gudinas approached him and said, "Those are my keys." Colbert asked Gudinas for a reward for finding and returning the keys, and Gudinas told him that he will be back with $50 for him. Now, if things weren't strange enough, someone had called police to report that there was a man looking into cars in that same parking lot where the homeless man, Colbert, gave the keys to Gudinas. A Bicycle Patrol Orlando police officer named John Chisari received the call and arrived in that parking lot. He approached the homeless man, Colbert Presley, just as a red 92 Geo Metro was driving away from that parking lot in a hurry out of the parking lot. We would later learn that that Geo Metro belonged to Michelle McGrath. According to some reports, Officer Chisari wrote down the license plate number, and other reports state that it was the homeless man who relayed the tag number to the officer because he had a better view of it. And then the pay school employee, Jane Brand, spotted Officer Chisari in the parking lot on his bicycle and approached him to let him know about the strange man that she found inside the gated school property who ran out through the alleyway. After speaking with Officer Chisari, Jane Brand decided to make her way back to the school by going through that alleyway. Officer Chisari, who was still in the parking lot, then heard a loud scream coming from the alleyway. It was Jane Brand screaming, "Bloody murder," just like in the movies. Officer Chisari ran over there, pointed his flashlight to the ground, and there was the body of Michelle McGrath. Crime scene technicians processed the crime scene where they lifted bloody handprints from the wall and the door's push bar. They also placed into evidence some bloody men's jeans that they found hanging nearby. They also found Michelle's handbag, and along with some contents in the bag was Michelle's ID. There was no money in the bag. And biological DNA was recovered from one of the victim's legs. Thomas Gudinas arrived back at the apartment where he was staying at about 7:30 in the morning. At least one of his roommates would later tell authorities that Gudinas was no longer wearing his blue jeans that morning. He was wearing black shorts. They also noticed that his hands were all scratched up and cut up and bloody. And when Gudinas removed the black shorts, there was some blood on the boxers that he was wearing. When the roommates asked Gudinas why he's all bloody, Gudinas had said that he got into a fight with two black men that tried to rob him, and they forced him to remove his pants before running away to escape them, and then found the black shorts. Michelle's car, the red Geo Metro, was found about 7:30 that night near the Holiday Club apartments off Curry Ford Road. Detectives decided to place surveillance on the car for several days to see if the killer would return to the car, but he never did. So the car was hauled off for forensic processing. Inside the car, they found some of what were likely some contents of Michelle's handbag, including a bank checkbook, and they were only able to lift fingerprints from that checkbook in the car. Fingerprints that matched the bloody prints lifted in the alleyway where Michelle's body was found. Investigators had prints and they had DNA and vague descriptions of the strange man from the homeless man, Colbert Presley, and the Pace School employee, Jane Brand. What they didn't have was a name. However, news of the attack was all over the papers and television and radio. About a week after the attacks, one of Thomas Gudinas' roommates saw the news and told Gudinas, "Hey, we were there. And that was the same night that you disappeared on us. Did you kill that girl?" According to the roommate, Gudinas had replied, "Yeah, I killed her, and then I R'd her." Remember, I can't say that word here on YouTube. Gudinas' roommate later told authorities that at first he didn't take Gudinas seriously. He thought it was just a sick joke. Anyway, soon after that, Thomas Gudinas left Florida and went back home to North Carolina. And then Rachel Smith. Remember her? The woman who escaped from a man that chased after her in the parking lot that night, about a half hour before Michelle was attacked. She saw the news, and she realized it was on that same night that she had escaped an assault. She called police, and after describing what happened and the time that it happened, police were confident that it was the same man. She provided a detailed description, and that police composite sketch made its way to the news. Now, it was about 3 weeks after the murder that those friends of Thomas Gudinas contacted police and told them, I think you better have a look at Gudinas. He looks a lot like that composite, and all the details of the incident adds up to what they saw that night and early the next morning. Detectives traveled to North Carolina and ended up interviewing Thomas Gudinas in jail because he was arrested for theft. And the first thing that they noticed was that he was the splitting image of the composite sketch provided by Rachel Smith. And when detectives mentioned the name Michelle McGrath to Gudinas, he stopped talking, saying that he wanted a lawyer. He lawyered up. But investigators got hand and palm prints, and that was all she wrote for Thomas Gudinas. Not to mention that the woman who was chased, Rachel Smith, the school employee Jane Brand, and the homeless man Culbert Presley, all positively identified him. A year after the crime, in 1995, Gudinas was found guilty, and by a vote of 10-2, he was sentenced to death. The judge in that case looked at Thomas Gudinas and said, "You shall be put to death in the electric chair by having electrical current pass through your body in such amounts and frequency until you are rendered dead. May God Almighty have mercy on your soul." According to a report from the Orlando Sun-Sentinel, Gudinas had tears streaming down his face as the judge spoke those words. As I said earlier, Michelle McGrath was 27 years old. She had 3 younger sisters, and the 4 of them were all very close. Michelle graduated from Oak Ridge High School in Orlando, where she was named the Homecoming Queen in 1984, 10 years before her death. She was working as a clerk for the Martin Marietta Corporation, and she was a Rollins College business student. Others who were interviewed told reporters that Michelle was very generous and would even take the time to deliver clothing to homeless people. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button for more death row and upcoming execution stories so that you're alerted when the next video comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Take care and bye for now.